Hi, I'm John Forde. Coming up next on the St. Paul Forum, I'll be speaking with 5th Ward Council Member Amy Brendmoen. That's next on the St. Paul Forum. Welcome to the St. Paul Forum. I'm John Forde. With me this week is St. Paul City Council Member Amy Brendmoen. Welcome.
Thank you.
Tell us all about you. Where did you grow up, and how did you come to get this job?
All right. Well, actually, I'm one of those nomadic people. I counted one time, and I think I've moved 25 times in my life.
Wow.
I was actually born in North Dakota, believe it or not, but I've moved around the Twin Cities. I lived in Minneapolis, Little Falls, Stillwater, Madison, the East Coast. But I just made a choice in my 20s to move back to live in St. Paul, a city that I've always really loved and wanted to dig in and be a bigger part of, and eventually landed in the Como neighborhood. And about 2 years ago now, or I guess 3 years ago now, I decided to run for city council, thinking that there weren't enough women on the city council and thinking that the city council could use a fresh perspective and a fresh voice, and ran an incumbent race challenge, narrowly won, and have been really just learning the ropes of city politics, city council, and trying to make a difference here in the city that's we're all so fond of.
So you've been in office how long now?
This is the beginning of my 3rd year.
Okay. Is it still fun?
Oh my gosh, it's so much fun. It's the best job I've ever had.
Okay. Is it more energizing?
I think the more I learn, the more it becomes more complicated, but also it stays energizing because there's always something new to learn. One of my colleagues, Council President Lantry's been in seat for I think 17 years, and says she's still learning something new every day. So I can take that to the bank.
Okay. Now tell me about the 5th. You've never pleaded the 5th, have you?
No, but I did.
Did you get that joke off?
No.
Okay.
But I actually did meet the guy in Minneapolis who just got elected to Ward 5.
Okay.
So, so there's that. The 5th Ward is a bit of Como, the Como neighborhood, most of the North End neighborhood, a slice of the East Side, Payne Phelan, like what we call the Near East Side, and then what I refer to as a downtown neighborhood called Railroad Island, which is the far southeast corner of my ward.
Okay. And what are the big, how important is it for a city council member to focus on the institutions, the big businesses and the big nonprofits that probably have a lot of employees? Do you need to cater to institutions, or is it all just constituent one by one?
Well, the wards are broken up in the city of St. Paul real differently. Some are very residential. The 6th ward in particular is highly residential, and that's the east side, kind of north and east. And also, I suppose, the 7th ward. Others, like the downtown and wards that include industrial areas, have a different constituency. Mine is a bit of a mix. And I always think that it's important to take your big institutions and what they bring to the ward, from the Como Zoo to institutions like Linders, Hamernick's, and also Morelli's and Urusso's, and what they bring to the ward, but also how does that tie into the bigger picture of the city as a whole? Because when one area is hurting, we all suffer in a way, and if they're thriving, we all thrive. So I think it's important to look at it both ways.
Now, once you get started on a litany of businesses like that, it's hard to stop, isn't it? Because you want to mention them all.
Right, or I'll get a big knuckle sandwich from somebody.
Right.
Yes.
All right. What are the pressing issues right now in the ward?
Well, it's a very, very different areas. Sometimes I have 3 boys, and sometimes I think they sort of remind me of how different my kids are. You know, there's Como, which is residential and generally a fairly affluent working class community, established, and just a really beautiful, wonderful place to live and work. And it has its own challenges, with organizing, but it's generally a fairly established community. The North End, I believe, recently learned that it is the most economically challenged area in the entire Ramsey County. I know that people often think it's Frogtown or the East Side, but it's North End. And so we have challenges with poverty, with there's a large influx of Karen refugees that have chosen to live in the North End, and so we have challenges and opportunities with new immigrant community.
Before you move on past the North End largely means Rice Street, doesn't it?
Rice Street is in the center of the North End, and it includes everything from Loeb Lake on the western side, which is the Como Lake's little-known sister.
Okay.
And then all the way to the interstate on the eastern boundary.
Okay.
And Trout Brook Nature Sanctuary will be there.
Now we're going to talk about the Eastern District as well.
Yeah, now my award goes into beyond the highway about a mile over to Edgerton and almost to Payne Avenue. So that's a landmark that people are familiar with. And the housing stock on the east side is fabulous, kind of hilltop housing and the kind of neighborhoods where people, sometimes reminds me of a Selby Dale neighborhood where there's opportunities to renovate and turn over houses and bring back some of that historic beauty in the community, but also it has its own challenges with, as we saw in the news this summer, with some gang violence, youth violence, and just there are opportunities there as well, but as a challenged part of the city. And then Railroad Island is what I was saying earlier, we call a downtown neighborhood with all the activity in Lower Town. This is a community that tucks up real close to East 7th Street, and you can see where the new ballpark will be from this neighborhood.
But you don't get a piece of it, you just get part of the parking lot? Or
Just what you can see from there?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's yet to be seen.
Okay.
But we do think about that as an opportunity for that neighborhood to really reclaim itself as part of the kind of the eastern side of downtown. So it's a very diverse community with different needs.
And it's kind of an easy way to think about the geographic boundaries of it as well. That, I mean, you could catch an extremely long fly ball or home run at one end. On the other end, if the animals got out of the zoo, it's right on isn't the zoo right on your border?
Yep, it is.
Okay.
The Como Lake is in my ward. The golf course and zoo is just to the side and in Ward 4, but I always say my community members don't really care where the boundaries are. So we, Council Member Russ Stark and I it's a fluid boundary.
Okay, you constituent service for non-constituents.
Just want to make sure that people's voices are
And
heard.
even when it's frozen, you still can't drive on Como Lake, can you?
Well, you could.
Not legally.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And now the zoo, I mean, just the word Como, I grew up in the west suburbs, so Como basically meant zoo when we were growing
Right.
up. How important is that zoo, not just to the ward, but to the city as a whole?
Huge. I mean, people call it the crown jewel of the city. A recent statistic I read from the Met Council says that we get 4.4 million visitors to the Como area annually, which makes it like either the first or second most visited attraction in the entire state. I mean, everybody's been to Como. Everyone has a story about Como. It's a big deal. Right now, in front of the legislature, we have a Como transportation bill or bonding request because it's so popular and so wonderful. It also means there's a lot of traffic and a lot of confusion, and we want to make some efforts to make it easier for people to come and go, to increase the use of the free shuttle service that's over at the state fairgrounds and into the zoo area. There's a brand new pool, and just with all this wonderfulness comes lots of people. So I think it's a plan to try to really coordinate that. But yeah.
I've got a story about the zoo because when I was growing up, they let the giant tortoises roam around and they let kids ride on them. And I got to ride on the tortoises. Unfortunately, my parents did not get a photo or do not have a photo of that. But about 5 years
But you
ago,
remember.
I remember it vividly.
Yeah.
And about 5 years ago, I thought, whatever happened to those tortoises? And tortoises are, in fact, the longest living, I don't know, it's primates or not primates, but vertebrates. And they actually got shipped. They're in a better place. They're in Honolulu. Not
Seriously.
a better place. All those tortoises, maybe one or two have died, but they shipped them to Honolulu because they can be outside 12 months instead of the 5 they were allowed here. So.
Okay, I'm going to say 7. I'm just going to be optimistic.
Not if you're cold-blooded. You can't make a mistake or use free
Right.
solids.
Well,
So,
I thought you were going to say that they were moved to the Renaissance Festival because my kids claim that they're turtles crawling around with kegs of root beer on their backs.
Okay, that's pretty funny. You're a supporter of the local arts. Tell us about the Ward 5 Featured Artist Program.
Okay, well, when I first saw my office, which is lovely in the Ramsey County Courthouse and City Hall building, I knew that I would never have enough stuff for the walls, to cover the walls, unless I went crazy with maps, which I could possibly do. So we decided to start promoting the local artists in Ward 5 on the walls in the office. And about every 3 to 4 months, we exchange the art that's on the walls with a new, different artist. We started out with a watercolor artist and actually sold some of the artwork, but we've had things from We had kid art from Northdale Rec Center, and I think it was really a treat to have the kid art up, especially when they came to see it on the walls, and we're so excited to see their works of art displayed in frames on the art walls. But we've also had weavings from the Karen community, and we recently, actually it's still sitting on the floor, getting ready to put up on the walls, from an artist named Margie Grill, who is a Ward 5 resident, and she has fabulous pen and ink and watercolor works, and it's been a really fun way to make our workspace a more pleasant and warm environment, and also to bring the community into the office and make it a space that they feel like they're part of. I mean, that's something that has been important to me since I decided to run. I wanted to be accessible in terms of like, this office is our space, and then also I take community office hours into the ward and meet on the first and third Tuesday of every month at the Rice Street Library, and have people come to office hours there, so that they don't have to come downtown and go through a metal detector, find a place to park, just to visit with their council member. And I find week after week, people come to visit and share their big ideas, tell me things that's bugging them, ask for ways to be more involved, talk about their pet issues. It's a pretty cool thing.
We're always trying to make a better show here. And one of the things that I think about is, with the guest, is tongue speed. And you have blazing tongue speed. You talk fast, you've got a lot of ideas, and it's hard for me to keep up, so my mind is just wandering a little bit. But I'd like to have a plan for the show, but it brought up, when you talked about arts, it brought up your other job, because you don't have just one job, you have another job.
Well,
You've had a background in the private sector.
Yep.
And in the public sector.
Yep.
But talk a little bit about your I don't know, sustenance? I don't know what I'm saying. You get paid something as a council member, but,
right.
But you have another job.
Yeah, well, I don't.
Oh, I'm sorry, I thought you did.
I did.
Okay.
I worked for a local nonprofit. Now outside of the city council, which is really, it is a full-time job, there's no question about it, I'm a race director for a triathlon. And so that takes up some bandwidth, but it's not as much as having 2 full-time jobs.
Okay. I was going to ask about that later. But why don't you tell us about the triathlon?
The triathlon is a fundraiser that a group of friends of mine and I created as a give back to YMCA Camp St. Croix. It's a place really growing up where, as I mentioned, I moved a lot, and I never really kind of found my place in school, and I really found my place out in the Y camping environment. And these girlfriends are friends that I've had since I was 13, 14 years old. And so we do a triathlon on the grounds of the camp. It's a swim, bike, and run, and we give the money that we generate from the race back to camp to help parents afford to send their kids to camp if they need extra funds.
And you did get 2 letters of recommendation from previous attorney generals. Tell us about your time with the AG's office.
Okay, I worked for 11 years at the Attorney General's office, first under Skip Humphrey and then under the entire terms of Mike Hatch. I started out in the consumer phone room, consumer advocacy, and it's the hardest job I ever had, sitting on the phone and taking complaints from people who were hot up to here. But it also was a really great place to learn to listen to people, learn to respect that even if you didn't fully understand why things were up to here, that they were there, and to help bring them down and get into problem-solving mode. And eventually worked my way into sort of a policy advocate and communications person and focused on utilities. But when I ran for this office, I felt like I was qualified in a lot of ways, just based on that constituent work that I did there, and just how, especially particularly under the Hatch administration, that was just a top priority, is like getting to people, answering their concerns, respecting what they had to say, figuring out a way to say yes, even if sometimes it was a different yes than they thought it was going to be. And I feel like that has served us very well. And the staff that I have, Kim and Donna, also believe in that. So it's a nice way to treat constituents.
A psychologist would call that de-escalating skills, to get them to, lower their blood pressure level again. And that's half of negotiating skills. Do you also have escalating skills? Can you drive the fork at people and make them choose now?
Yes.
Yes, okay. I work with the Attorney General's office. Of course you can. Okay. In case you're just joining us, this is the St. Paul Forum. I'm John Forde. And with me today is Council Member Amy Brendmoen from the 5th Ward. So tell me about the things that, like on your website, there are 3 big concerns, and one of them is housing.
Housing, yeah. Housing's a big deal in St. Paul, and actually I was recently elected the chair of the Housing and Redevelopment Authority in St. Paul, and that is ultimately the same board of people as the St. Paul City Council, but we changed titles and seats a little bit, but serve in that role. And I was interested in that position just because I recognize how important housing and economic development are in St. Paul. Those two things really go hand in hand. I don't know if people generally know or understand that in St. Paul, a third of our parcels are not on the tax rolls. So we're starting out at sort of a 30% deficit compared to other communities just because we have so many nonprofits and schools and other government buildings. The state capitol is here, the county buildings are here.
Parks?
So there's, and parks, if they're parceled, I mean, the parks are in addition to in lots of cases. So it's very important that when there are economic opportunities, we take them to expand our tax base. And also that we have the housing to be able to house people, keep them stable. Stable housing means education is going to be a better and more smooth, for children and their families. So I think in St. Paul it's critically important that housing is a stable and I'd want to say dignified. And when you talked a little bit earlier, I mentioned that the north end and east side of my neighborhoods have some housing challenges. There's a high rental rate. I think rental is great, but we need to make sure that we have landlords landlords and tenants who understand the rights and responsibilities that go with that. So that's something that's really important. And from day one, we've been really working with DSI, the Department of Safety and Inspections, who deals with landlords, to try to develop a set of tools that's, incentives and penalties for landlords that are not complying with landlord and tenant laws, to try to stabilize and make dignified the housing options available for people and for them to be affordable so that they can stay in place and build a life.
There must be a fair amount of social science, and I'm throwing this out there not knowing if you know the answer or not, but as to what the density of rental property to owned property can be. I mean, at some point you get suboptimum, and if it's maybe more than 50 or 60% rental, the homeowners tend to just kind of give up and go away, don't they?
Well, in St. Paul, I think it's 50% rental, 50% home ownership. In the north end, and I know in particular in the Railroad Island community that I mentioned earlier, it's 75% rental, and I think the numbers are skewed also in the east side and the north end, so that it's closer to 70%. So there is a little bit of an imbalance there, and it does have an impact on the community. I again think that if your landlords are invested and feel like they're part of the community, that number can be okay if it's not 50-50.
Yeah.
But I would say that we have challenges with landlords in a large part of my ward.
I mean, you hear the phrase absentee landlord. I imagine it makes a difference how nearby the landlord is. If they're just down the block as opposed to in Arizona,
right,
that probably makes a huge difference.
Yeah, or if they just bought a portfolio of housing. I think that makes a big difference if you live in a duplex and your renter lives upstairs. We do, I think when the housing market was low, we had a lot of first-time landlords come in and purchase properties. So we do continue to face challenges with those properties and are, again, working with our Department of Safety Inspections to try to proactively deal with housing before it becomes a visual blight, before it becomes a safety hazard to tenants. If tenants don't speak English as a first language or have been in a little trouble, they tend to not call in problems, so they don't draw attention to the property, so sometimes we have to step in and be proactive.
It seems like first-time landlords is almost a classic example of where an active government can do good things because there's an educational dimension to it. We don't want to come down with the hammer and the law, but understanding the boundaries and the parameters and the information flow is probably very essential for people who begin in that business.
Right. I mean, it's a small business, really, and but the thing is that you're not opening up a cookie stand. You're opening up a property, a home,
and you're always open.
Right, and you're serving human beings and their housing, which is a basic necessity. So, yeah. You don't have to be a certified anything to be a landlord in St. Paul, and I think that actually would be a good thing.
Oh, interesting. Okay. I'm suddenly intrigued by the exotic phrase Railroad Island. Is it adjacent to Sweet Hollow? Does it overlap?
Yes.
Really?
Yeah. Railroad Island shares Sweet Hollow Park Reserve as a boundary. So it's between them. And if viewers haven't been to Sweet Hollow, they simply have to. It's one of the coolest little treasures in St. Paul. When you kind of go under the old railroad tunnel, and all of a sudden you're in this like reservoir woods, that's relatively untouched in the middle of the city. It's like mini Central Park. But yes, Railroad Island is an area that early on, actually when I was campaigning, the ward boundaries shifted and Railroad Island was added to the 5th Ward. So of course I jumped in my car and drove over to this Railroad Island place to figure out what it was and where it was, and just instantly fell in love with this neighborhood. It's sort of hilly, the housing stock is really interesting. There's a big vista called Rivoli Bluff that looks right out over on the city. It's probably one of the most beautiful vistas there is of St. Paul. And we learned that the lumber barons first moved to that area in St. Paul. But when the railroads came in, there was soot, and it made it, like when they put out their wash, it would get dirty when it was drying, and they're like, the heck with this, and moved to Summit Avenue. So there's less railroads, or less sooty now, and yet the beautiful housing in the community, remains there, so close to downtown. And so we've decided to put a spotlight on Railroad Island and really focus on what kind of what we could do to really affect change in that neighborhood. And actually just last weekend had a great workshop with maybe 40 or 50 people from the community in attendance, looking at Payne Avenue between East 7th Street and Edgerton, which is slated to be rebuilt, but looking at it with a new sort of pedestrian bike. They call it 8 to 80 planning, where if you're 8 to 80 years old, it's all a street that you can use. And how to bring that beautiful park kind of into the street instead of have the street be a barrier to the park. We have Morelli's Italian delicatessen and liquor store, and Russo's and La Palma that are all huge destination establishments in that area. I mean, people literally come, it's almost like Como in the east part of the ward, with people driving from all over to go to frequent these businesses, and they have real traffic and parking problems. And so to try to figure out how does that mesh, how does it tie in with development downtown? How do we capitalize on this moment? Because that is going to be like the next go-to neighborhood, and we want to be ready to catch the community members as their interest peaks.
Okay, we have about 5 minutes left, and I know you want to talk about the exciting projects that are coming up in the ward.
Yeah, well, that's a perfect segue, because really the first one is this Payne Avenue redesign project that we're have been working on, and it has been really fun to work with the Riverfront Corporation and with community members and the business owners collaboratively to come up with a vision for what this community will be in the future. And just really thinking about energy, railroad, and like where we're going with energy, what's happening at the Hams Brewery and how it will tie in.
What is happening at the Hams Brewery?
Another lots of cool stuff.
Okay.
I'll leave that for Kathy Lantry and Dan Bostrom to talk about. But so that's a really cool project. Of course, all parts of the ward are, you have to love them equally, and of course, but in the spirit of summarizing, I guess one of the other areas that have been really intrigued with is. We've talked a lot about Rice Street in the North End, but I really believe that the East-West Street, Maryland Avenue, has a lot of potential to be an economic development catalyst. When I think about the resources available in Como neighborhood, I really want to figure out how to get them across Maryland Avenue and into frequenting businesses on the North End. And also recognizing that young artists and musicians are moving to the North End because it's affordable. And so there's sort of these things that are, coalescing, but the road that goes down is kind of a barrier. There's an ugly railroad bridge that needs to be fixed. There's a hidden jewel, that Loeb Lake, that's kind of, when you find it and walk around it, you're like, oh my goodness, this is beautiful. And having people be more aware of that. There's a wetland reserve on Maryland. I mentioned just briefly Trout Brook Nature Sanctuary, which is close to the highway. It's a project that's been underway for maybe 20 years. And I'm lucky enough to see it come to life in my term. But when you stand up at the construction site right now, it's a 20-acre, it might even be bigger than 20 acres, actually. Like 200, I could be that wrong.
Yeah, okay.
Whatever. But you can see it coming to life, and you can see how it's going to really green up that part of the neighborhood. Cayuga project is the reconstruction of Highway 35 on the eastern border of the North End, which includes several new bridges. And just improve traffic flow in that area. So I feel like this is the time to really get people crossing the North End and patronizing the businesses in that North End as well. So we're really working on sort of a vision for Maryland and what that can bring to the community, and have made strides even with the Almighty Railroad in like helping advance that vision. So that's pretty exciting stuff. And then I guess in Como, that I live in Como, the South Como neighborhood, and we've recently switched some district council boundary lines, so there's a kind of a coming together of North and South Como. That's pretty exciting. And that community is talking about, again, that transportation plan that will help, make it easier to get to and from Como and make that experience easier on the neighborhoods, Always, when it's a good thing, it can even be too much of a good thing. And so to try to meet those concerns of the neighbors as far as how do we deal with being overly loved and that. And so that's been a fun thing to work on as well.
Okay,
so
we got about
stuff.
1 minute left. Is there a website you want to send people to other than, well, not other than your city council website is probably the easiest way for them to access it.
Yep, the website is www.stpaul.gov/ward5. And we do try to keep it updated. My aide, Kim O'Brien, writes a wonderful newsletter that people can sign up for, and we send it out if we're on our game about every 3 months, so no spam. And that's another great way to know what's going on in Ward 5.
So tell us again about the community office hours.
Well, the community office hours are actually the first and third Tuesday of every month at Rice Street Library from 4 o'clock till 5:30.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, this has been a blast. Thank you
Good.
so much.
We've been speaking with Council Member Amy Brendmoen of the 5th Ward, Council Member of the City of St. Paul. That's all we've got time for on the St. Paul Forum. Come join us again next week.